Me too, all over the place.
Did you actually have a note that says, please remember to start recording?
And I have five post-it notes everywhere because before I do consults, I always forget to ask authors if they would like to have it recorded because sometimes people they just even like to listen to what we talked about
Yes,
and they might find that helpful. But I don't know. There's literally five of them all
that's so
over.
funny. That's funny. Well, welcome, Melanie, for our restart here because I failed to record. Melanie Yu of Made Me Blush Books, who we were just saying also edits the closed door, not just the steamy
Mhm.
books that make us
Not just the
are
steamy
Twitter
ones.
pated, right? Um, I would love for you to start before we get into the topic, which is around the difference between a developmental edit and a beta analysis, or a beta analysis or a beta review. What do
Oh,
you call it?
there's so many terms. So
So,
there's a
okay,
lot of
we'll
terms.
get there. I love your story of how you came to be a developmental editor, and
Oh,
just because it's a little different than so many other people's. So
hmm.
start there.
Well, this is what I would call a COVID career change. COVID happened and I've always loved to read. Don't get me wrong. I always did. I got into my mom's Harlequin romances when I really probably shouldn't have been into them, but I did. And then, reading kind of went up and down for me over the years. But when COVID started, I realized there's something called Kindle Unlimited and there's indie publishing. And then I kind of went bananas. And I started my Kindle Unlimited, I think probably March 15th of 2020. And in that year, I read 333 books. And then the year after that, I read, I think something like 377 books. Um, and I started doing someone said to me about, oh no, wait, let's backtrack for a sec. After I read for all those books, a year later, I was thinking, you know what? I want to start a bookstagram. I didn't know like anything like that existed. So I started a secret bookstagram. I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't want anyone in my family to put in their 5 cents about what they think would make it grow or, all that sort of stuff. And so I just started it. All I did was I wrote book reviews. Wrote book reviews to support, authors that I liked. And as I started doing that, it grew into doing arcs. And sometimes I would find little things inside of books that I feel like I wanted to, not needed to, I wanted to share with authors to just be like, oh, did you notice that there's like this kind of discrepancy or inconsistency, something like that? And then it kind of grew into sort of doing what I thought was beta reading at the time, and applied for couple beta reading spots with authors. And it sort of just grew from there. And I realized that what I kind of termed or thought was beta reading or whatever, it sort of just evolved into developmental editing because even I had no idea really what editing was in the beginning. I had no idea that there is developmental, there's line, there's copy, there's proof, like there's all these sorts of different types of edits. And even now when people ask me what I do, they're always like, "Oh, so you go and like correct grammar?" I was like, "No, actually I don't. I don't do I don't do that type of editing." So
Yeah.
it's sort of it was an interesting thing. And so I am self-taught. And I feel like I have that in common with a lot of my authors because a lot of authors, they had some desire inside of them to put all these words into a story. And I have this desire to go through these manuscripts and like, I don't know, I've always been somebody that likes being in on a project in the beginning and trying to help guide people because I had owned my own company before, a personal assistance company. So I obviously like helping people, and everything. So it just kind of evolved. And truthfully, English was my best subject. If I had known that there's so many different things out there in the world, I probably wouldn't have gotten an economics degree. I probably would have gotten something
That,
more in line with what I'm naturally able to do.
right. I being picky with other people's words. Now, do you write too? Like the thing that intrigues me so much about this is when so when I started writing romance, I had not read a lot of romance, and it took me a long time to figure out what what a romance is. And I come from a nonfiction, like technical writing background. And so when I was researching how do you write a romance, I was going academic. I wasn't actually reading 300 romance books in 1 year, which I
Right.
think would make someone an excellent writer, because you just like all of those beats would be so intuitive to you. Obviously, they're intuitive to you as an editor now.
Hmm. I don't write. I would say that I'm a strong writer. I think that was one of the things that on my Bookstagram page, the people that would comment the most tended to be authors. And they would sometimes, I've had people ask me like, "Oh, are you a teacher? Are you like, do you write? Do you whatever?" I was like, "No, I don't." It just writing does come naturally to me, but I can honestly say, as much as my husband wishes and stuff that I would write a book, I don't have a story
That's
in
not
me.
that's not your thing. Well, I
Not
and
right now, anyway, at
oh, there
all.
you go. Uh, well, we need all the people. So yay that you've got that skill for supporting authors. Okay, so I would love you to kind of touch on this, because I said, what's the difference between a beta analysis or a beta critique? Like, tell us what that is, such that it's like, I think maybe define what a developmental edit is for folks who might
Mhm.
not know briefly, and then what is a beta analysis?
Beta analysis is something, and okay, let's start with the developmental. So the developmental editor is someone that looks at the big picture of your story. We would look at the story overall. And when I go through a manuscript, I try not to get caught up in line edits or, anything like that. If I see something that kind of stands out, yeah, sure, I'll correct it. But that's not my job. My job is to go through there and I'm looking, especially for romance, my biggest thing is emotional connection. We need those readers pulled into the story at all times. And that can come through so many different ways. Your character development, the plot, just all the things. But my goal is really strong emotional connection to the story. And so I will look for, sometimes it's a plot hole, it's maybe too many things going on, but that's what I'm looking for as a developmental editor, the big picture. When it comes to beta analysis, the state of the manuscript that comes to me in a beta analysis is usually one that is almost done. It's if I make and it's mostly like reader reactions, but a little bit more in depth than that. It's I go through each chapter. I give you the reader reactions. I give you inline comments as well. Maybe there's a certain line that's super funny, or maybe there's something that is, looks like, wow, this would make a really good teaser. You know what I mean? I don't always find those, but sometimes something just really stands out and goes, you know what, this needs to get put on social media and,
Hmm.
needs to be put with a really interesting picture or a series of pictures to explain it. Um, but it's really like where the story is when I get it. Because to me, a beta analysis is something that comes probably like when you're almost done with it. And any suggestions that I make, if you do decide to go in and make any tweaks, actually is going to be very little. Whereas a developmental edit, when I go in there, sometimes it will literally be, I don't think this story should start at this chapter. I think it should start at your chapter 5, because chapters 1 through 4 right now are, they're okay. They could be woven in, but if you start here, because this is where the reader will get grabbed instantly, whether it's through some sort of circumstance that they're in, like maybe they're fighting, or maybe she's doing something that a lot of people can relate to, like your whatever it is, that is a good moment to start a story, and not just, oh yeah, I went into this place and I met this guy,
Hmm.
and that's great. Um, but
The
a lot
old
of
never
times,
start a story with someone waking up, but
yeah,
in
exactly.
romance context. Yeah. Hmm.
Hmm.
I have to say, I love that you edit as a reader. Like I absolutely respect every editor who has got a long list of degrees and
Hmm.
qualifications from school and such. And there's obviously there's value in that. And I also think there's a lot of value in reading like or editing like a reader, which it sounds, that's what I'm getting from this conversation from you, is that that's
It's
your
a
approach.
Yes, absolutely. My approach is very intuitive. It's sort of I'll go through things and yes, I pick up things like your inconsistencies and things like that too, but a lot of it is extremely intuitive and which I think as I've gone on this journey is so important for romance. This is especially indie. It's like something very different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And an indie romance reader, I think sometimes too is different from a traditional romance reader as
Explain.
well.
What do you think?
Um,
Why do you think that?
indie indie readers I find are sometimes they're more accepting and they're more open to a lot of things, whereas sometimes people who are going to buy a book for $20 at the bookstore aren't as willing to forgive maybe a little plot hole or a little inconsistency or some sort of plot circumstance that seems really kind of far-fetched or something, you know what I mean? They aren't as willing to look past that. They might get hung up on it, you know what I mean? But indie readers, they're like, bring it on. Like, I want all the feels, I want, whatever it is. And there's so much out there, and you can get so specific in the type of story that you read that you know what you want and you expect it. And so you're like, yes, like
I,
I edit dark romance as well, and there are some very interesting circumstances that go on in some of those. So yes, I think that indie romance readers are a little bit more open
it's
to.
funny. I had never thought of that. And yet we hear about whale readers. Has everyone heard of, no, okay, Valerie's not heard of whale readers. Ella has. So Melanie would have is a whale reader.
Good.
Reading 300 books in a year. Oops. There we go. That is a whale reader. And I guess if you would have to love indie to be a whale reader, because traditional books, there aren't enough of them published for you to read that
No,
quickly. So
there
yeah.
isn't.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me, let me actually just stop. Does anyone have questions right now for Melanie before I ask another one myself? No? Everyone's just sitting like this though. Okay. So question, what is the difference between asking author friends or just friends to do a beta read of our books compared to the beta analysis that you provide?
I I would say the difference is in the feedback that you get. And it really because really you can find beta readers. And I actually just read a Substack from a very famous author, and it sounds like she really relies on her beta readers to do her kind of more developmental editing kind of tasks. It really depends on what it is that you want from them, because a lot of the time, if you have a beta reader that you found in, say, um, is one of your readers and just likes your stories. Sometimes that works because they know your style and they like your writing, and that's really awesome. But then sometimes the feedback that they're giving is exactly that. Like, I really like this chapter. Next chapter, I really like this chapter too. He's so cute, or he's so whatever. And it's not necessarily going to help you in feeling confident about what you're putting out there, other than, yay, that's great. And then sometimes I think with authors, if your author friend writes in a different style than you do, maybe they're much more plot driven and you are much more character driven and everything. Sometimes what they're picking up on, it can be useful, but at the same time, you could end up fixating on something that isn't necessarily useful to your style and to your voice, which can be hard. And sometimes too, like I don't know if it's a Canadian thing or what, but I feel bad asking people. They're busy too, and they're writing a lot as well. And so you're kind of like, oh, I really need you to read these chapters by this day because you want to get that feedback. And they're like, well, I'm really working on this deadline to get this done.
Right.
That's kind of hard as well. So that's, I think, those are the kind of biggest differences, I think.
I for the last book that I did, I paid for a beta analysis, which I didn't know you existed at the time. And I think it was through Hidden Gems, although it could have been books. I get confused. I think it was Hidden Gems though. And the way they set it up is you ask specific questions of the beta
Mhm.
readers, and they give you some sample questions. And I had another list of questions that I wanted to ask, and so I paid for six. I paid for six beta readers because I thought that would give me a nice broad,
Mhm.
nice breadth of. And I have to say, for the money I paid, I left wondering if I had asked the wrong questions. If
Mhm.
And so it makes me that, so it leads me to wonder about what you do. Like, if I were to give you my manuscript, would
Mhm.
I say, okay, these are the things I'm concerned about, or here are the questions I have? Or is it better just to let you use your intuition and notice what you notice?
You kind of get all of that. So, so you would get my reactions, and maybe I'll pick up on things that that never occurred to you. Um, that I really thought, oh, this is a really strong thing. This is a really strong character, or this person is really coming across a page really well. And I could see there must be another book for this person down the line. You know what I mean? And you never ask that in your questions. And then I will also go back and I will also look at the questions that you asked and try to give you answers to those as well. So you kind of get all of that. I don't focus just on your questions. I sort of do the whole thing. I look at it overall as well.
So, okay, questions from anybody. You're all getting a nice, is this a new idea for anybody? A beta analysis, something that comes before a developmental edit, new sort of. So,
Mm, I wouldn't say that it comes before. Sorry to
okay,
like
no, good.
interrupt.
Please correct me.
Um, I think really ideally for me, a beta comes after the developmental, and even maybe I wouldn't say before, probably not before copy proof, but maybe even after line, just because it's really like you want your story almost as done as you can get it before I read it, because you want to see what reader reaction is going to be like. And if there's lots of things going on still that aren't really finalized, then it's hard to, my reactions may not be that applicable. It's applicable to what's on the page right now. And so if you do it closer to publication, then you get hopefully a truer idea of how the public might respond to it. However, I have some authors so the other difference between developmental and beta for me is if you do a developmental edit with me, you get a lot of suggestions, a lot of things to consider, a lot of things to think about, to possibly rewrite, revise, cut out, maybe even sometimes. Not a lot. I don't do a lot of that, truthfully. But a beta analysis doesn't really get that unless there's sometimes some developmental stuff trickles in, but that's not really the whole point of the beta analysis for me. It's really about reader reactions and whatever questions you might have to pose, because sometimes there is something that you really want to get across and you want to know, is it coming across over
Right.
these 5 chapters? Do you feel like this when you read it?
Yeah.
Those types of things, I think, are what you're looking for in a beta analysis. Whereas like in developmental, who knows, maybe things are going to get completely moved around, and and you might want to go back to the drawing board and be like, you know what, I don't like this storyline at all. Let's just go
Right,
back.
right, right. Okay. Thank you for correcting that. I had my continuum wrong. Um, do you work with folks who like, okay, out of all, okay, I'm gonna admit something that might make you cringe. Um, Out of all the levels of editing and styles of editing that there are, so if we throw that one in as the fifth on the continuum of the ones that we know, developmental, copy, line proofreading, and beta analysis, honestly, to me, this one seems like if I could only invest in one level of editing, this one seems the most interesting. Like, I would skip the developmental. I would let I know, here you go. I would let my readers like Tammy do the proofreading because she's kick-ass. What is your gut reaction, which you just showed on your face?
I think,
Because you can
well,
only pick one because we can't afford to do all five, right? So
no, yeah, that's true. I would say the developmental is important because if you think about it, if you were to go to a publishing house, if your book was going to, get published by them, a developmental edit is the one that they will always do. Of course, they do the other ones too, but like this is the one that they first do. They need to make sure that the story is strong
yeah,
before they start going in and worrying even about grammar or anything. Like they want to make sure that the story is going to be one that is marketable to them, that is whatever. So, and like I said, in traditional publishing, like, plot holes and things like that, they don't really get overlooked. People
right.
get really hung up on them. They want that stuff. So I would still say developmental. And now I have authors that will come and do a developmental edit with me. And for whatever reason, sometimes it's like they're writing a trope that they don't normally write. However, it spoke to them and that's what got on the paper. And now they're committed. You know what I mean? And so we'll do a round of developmental edits. They make the changes, they do whatever, and then they're still not feeling that confident. And so then they'll be like, you know what? I want you to do a beta on it. As the story stands right now, as a reader, what do you think is going on? And then they go back. Sometimes they still end up making more changes and edits, and things like that. And so it's sometimes like they use all of those things, but I feel like the developmental edit is still a phase that is really good, especially when you feel like you're not 100% sure that your story's really done, but you can't quite figure out why. That would be the place to start. If you're close to publishing, like I said, a beta analysis is great. Or if you feel very strongly, I have some authors that like to do their manuscript, do all that stuff, and they want me just to do a beta analysis, which is quite thorough. And so to them, they feel that's
Mhm.
sufficient, and that's awesome too. So it's
I guess,
really
yeah.
about what you need.
I guess if you've just kind of made me think if I've written like if I always write secret baby trope, for instance, I
Mhm.
will understand the beats of a secret baby trope and
Mhm.
might not need that if I've done enough. Okay, like that's making sense. Diane asks, how would a beta analysis compare to a manuscript assessment?
Oh, this is where we get into this is where we get into the 5 million terms that are out there in indie publishing. I will be truthful. I have not heard of a manuscript assessment. If she could maybe give me
Yeah, do you
some,
want to describe what a
yeah,
manuscript assessment is, Diane?
that would be helpful.
Well, uh, I was investigating an editor who specializes in memoir. I'm working on fiction and I'm working on memoir. And on her website, her name is Ellie Barton,
Mhm.
and her services include manuscript assessment, developmental edit, and I don't know what, I haven't looked at it lately. But the manuscript assessment is probably a third of what I would pay her for a developmental edit. And it sounds like she reads the whole thing and she gives you like a 12-page editorial letter. It's kind of checking to see how marketable your book is,
Hmm.
how sound it is as the whole arc. And
Mhm.
what you're describing sounds kind of similar. That's all I'm just saying.
I would say it
Yeah.
probably is sort of similar. I guess I went with beta analysis just because it feels like it's a term that is out there for a lot of authors that seems kind of familiar to them. Like when I heard manuscript assessment, I wasn't really sure. I was hoping to just pick names for my services that people would give people an idea of, so like they've seen it somewhere before. But it does sound like it's sort of similar. And my pricing is sort of like that. Like I would say that the beta analysis is maybe around a third of what a developmental edit is.
Cool. Thank you. Good question, Diane. Yeah, it's funny, those questions. Question for Melanie. Can you please break down how you work with a new client? Do you provide samples of a developmental edit beta analysis before to see if your services are a good fit? I guess like a couple of pages. Or do you hold a call with the author after you've finished to discuss the feedback?
For developmental edits, I do like to do a sample edit. For beta analysis, I don't. It's not, like I said, it's not as intensive. And the feedback that you get from a beta analysis is you get the inline comments and you get the chapter summary, which depending on the length of your book can be somewhere like 10 to 12 pages. And then you get sort of a overall summary, which is usually 2 pages, 1 to 2 pages, with things kind of broken down by these are the things that I thought made the most impact. These are the things that sometimes they didn't work or didn't resonate for some reason. And maybe just like a few comments about the story overall. So that's what you would get as a beta analysis. But because the developmental edit is such a deep dive into your story, I do like to have a sample. Now, after both services, if you have a developmental edit, it does include like a 60-minute Zoom call. And a beta analysis does include a 30-minute Zoom call after as well. So we can talk about things.
Right. You don't have a website, do you?
I don't, but I have a price
Apologize.
list. I have a price list on my Instagram. If you click in the link in bio, it will take you to a price list, which it's there. I will give you guys well.
Thank you, Sarah.
The first ones to hear this, but I am going to be revising my prices. Anyone, of course, that books before I change it, of course, will be on the old pricing, but I've kind of gotten to the point now where it's time for me to change over to a more traditional editing pricing structure. So more of a by word thing.
How you mentioned, so I know when we were talking earlier, you mentioned names of some of the authors you work with. Who might we recognize as authors?
Well, if you're into Why Choose, Abby Millsaps, she just released yesterday. She is on a bestseller list right now. And C.W. Farnsworth, I have done beta for her. And Macaulay Smeltzer, I've done like a couple things for her. And I have a fantasy book I've worked on recently that is, I don't normally read fantasy, but I've known this person for a little while and she goes, I know it's not your normal thing, but can you please work on this one? Her name is Emberly Ash and the book is Crown of Earth and Sky. I don't know what it is. This story, it was so sticky to me after that I couldn't, like, it just kept going in my head. And I just was like, are you sure you don't have the next one written yet? I just want to see what's happening because I don't know, maybe it was what was going on in my life at that moment, but I really wanted to be taken out of this world. And it was perfect for that. I loved it. It was really good. I think that is one thing that is surprising to me recently is how much fantasy romance has kind of started to grow on me.
And how big it's becoming as a subgenre, romanticy, right?
Oh my goodness. Is it ever? I mean, some of the biggest authors out there are like fantasy romance writers. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Sarah's treading that right now. Sarah's got a trilogy, a fantasy trilogy, and is she's not an editor right now. But she's also working on romance. So curious, does let's see, do you do beta with women's fiction with romantic elements?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I feel like I think I have a project on my calendar that is going to be more like that. The author it's her first manuscript and she wasn't sure how to sort of categorize it, but based off the authors that she tells me that she really loves and things, I think it's going to end up being a little bit more like women's fiction with romance elements. So I would say yes, I'd be open to that.
There you go. Other questions for folks? Any ahas? Well, okay. I'll leave you a second to ask a question. Thinking.
I just want to say that this kind of putting the stages of editing in some kind of order is really helpful to me. Kind of gives me the idea of what I need to ask for when. So I appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I would have to say, though, that the developmental, it is one of those things that people, you can kind of slot it in anywhere. But to me, the most logical thing seems to be like to make the most, to get the most value out of the money that you spend. I think it's best not to go to line copy proof until you're really feeling solid about your story, because you don't want to have to keep going back and paying that editor to go through the new parts that you've written, and it just gets really confusing. You know what I mean? So I feel like, to me, a developmental edit is a good place to start if you're going to use one.
I have given Jen, my editor, books that haven't been quite ready for developmental, and to given her line edits. It's tricky.
It can be tricky. Even developmental edits. Sometimes I get manuscripts for developmental edits that are written up to maybe like 75%, and then they're like, I don't know what's coming next. And I think this is another part where there should be a little bit of maybe discussion around developmental editing and all the different sort of shades of it, I think. Because the type of developmental editing that I do, I will do things like look for inconsistencies and all those little bit more technical things. But when I give my suggestions, I think it is like you had said about how because I read so much, I will sometimes, when in my suggestions, they seem to be much more developmental, like a lot of ideas, like, you could go this way, or you could go this way, or, and things. And I think it's because I read so much. And sometimes too, it will be like, well, so-and-so just published this book and they just did this. I don't know if you want to do that or not, but, and I think, but whereas other developmental or content, because developmental goes under two different titles too, like sometimes we're called content editors, sometimes we're called developmental. I had somebody who she markets herself as a developmental editor recently in the summer, and it was so confusing to me because she's referring a client to me, and I'm like, well, if I'm going to be doing this for her, what are you going to be doing for her? And stuff. So even for me sometimes, or for us in the industry, I feel like it's really kind of confusing. I think because of the way that I work, and I give lots of ideas and suggestions creatively of where you can go with your story, I think that sometimes authors like that, especially when I do consults and we're going over someone's outline and they're not exactly sure where they want to go with something. They're like, okay, I want to know, it's these tropes. These are the tropes that I'm writing, but I'm not quite sure how to get, from what I have in my outline to that. So then we'll brainstorm and come up with a bunch of ideas. And she'd be like, oh, okay, I like this, I like that. And I think I can slot this in there. And you can see like the wheels kind of turning in their head. And then they fill in like all the rest.
It's
so
amazing.
That's why I think
it's
why
amazing
I really like
when you like, if I've been in that situation where you're like, I'm not really sure where this is going, and just even mentioning, well, what about this trope, all of a sudden, and it's so simple, right? Like, we can all look at the trope list, but to have somebody have that perspective is really valuable. Okay, other questions for Melanie? Oh, we've got Colleen. Going back to the concept of editing as a reader, have you ever been faced with providing a beta analysis for a book that wasn't really for you? How do you separate your subjective feedback that you would have as a casual reader from objective feedback as a professional? Very good question.
I tend to always find the good in the story, because there is good in every story. And I will mention those, and that's why there are sort of two sections to the beta analysis. If there are things that, like I said, I didn't really feel like resonated with me, I will put that in there. And I tend to actually, even though it is a very subjective thing to say, like, I like this or I don't like that, it's more of a resonance factor to me. If something really resonated to me, that means like, okay, I liked it. If it didn't really resonate with me, or I'm sitting there going, oh, what's going on here? I will tend to mention that. And that sort of goes into the did not resonate, AKA like didn't really like it. So I think that that's how I sort of get over the whole subjective objective sort of thing. Like it's all about resonance and emotional connection.
Right, right. Have you heard of Theodora Taylor's book, Seven Figure Fiction and Butter?
Oh, yes.
So, okay, so folks who aren't familiar, Theodora Taylor, but I think she published this one under T. Taylor. She's a romance author. She's a very accomplished romance author as Theodora Taylor. She wrote a book called Seven Figure Fiction, which my opinion is a terrible title for what the book is because it's such an engaging book. It's really short.
Really?
And it's all about injecting butter, what she calls butter into your stories. Valerie's like, what? Butter? I know. It's like everything is delicious with butter, right?
Mhm.
That's the premise. And she also has ghee and she has ice cream now. But you want to talk a little bit about that, because that might also answer Colleen's question about the objective and subjective, because butter is objectively delicious.
Mhm. It is, in the way that she's talking about it. Absolutely. It's the elements of a book that are basically universally appealing, because that's a big thing of hers, the universal fantasy kind of thing. And so to her, if you have enough butter in there, it doesn't matter what the reader is into per se, the story will still be appealing, which it does make sense, especially to romance authors. I mean, even Gwen Hayes and her romance beats, it's like she always says, this is a recipe for romance. It doesn't need to be followed exactly, but it's like a recipe, and these are sort of the things that romance readers expect. And I think that with Theodora Taylor, with her butter, it's one of those things that if you include enough of these sort of universal fantasy elements, people will just be drawn to the story regardless of what genre it is. So I think that's kind of the basic thing that she's saying, but she is great. And she's very engaging to listen to if you listen to it on audiobook. I don't know why. Nonfiction, I listen to. I am not an audiobook person. Like I don't like listening to romance, but nonfiction stuff, yes, for some reason I love doing it on audiobook, and she's very entertaining to listen to.
Yeah.
She's very like excited and energetic.
Yeah, she is. I've had the opportunity to sit when the last Bridgerton movie came out, she did a live let's watch it all together as a group, and she'd stop the movie, like she live streamed it and stopped it for the butter. It was really fun. And then we did that again in another group with Red, White, and Royal Blue. So, and it's really a really fun thing to watch movies, romance, romantic comedy, whatever, and try to look for those universal fantasies and realize when the butter is being spread. And you also mentioned Gwen Hayes, and for anyone who doesn't know, who isn't familiar, Gwen Hayes wrote a book called Romancing the Beat, and it is it's like this tiny little book, and it's
right here.
it's
big.
it's tiny, but it's powerful. It's like, I
Mhm.
don't know, it's like a mosquito. It's got a lot of power behind it. And it's a recipe. It's just kind of, these are the 20 beats that a reader will expect in a romance book. So you kind of want to hit them, and you want to hit them generally in this order. So
Generally around, this certain point. By around this point, you want the characters to be, pushing forward in the plot, and then around this one, it's good. And it's, I think, for things like outlining and things like that, she even has PDF things on her website if you sign up, I think, for her newsletter or something.
Yeah.
And you get access to these PDFs where you can fill in like the beats. It doesn't have to be like that, but if you have a whole bunch of stuff going around in your head and you want to sort of get something on paper, that's might be a good way to start.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions? Valerie?
Okay. Our group had a discussion a while back on what is dark romance, and I would love to get your take on that.
Ah, I see. Okay. Well, there are, I think, certain elements of a story that would just tend to, people would think of it as dark romance. Mafia, motorcycle clubs, like, anything sort of criminal tends to make it that heroes that need redemption in rather large ways. Um, the heroes often are alpha to a higher degree, and there is morality is very gray. That tends to be another thing for dark romance, and just whatever they're trying to achieve in the plot. It is often like criminal related, or there's just something about these characters that they're very sort of shady, they're doing weird things, and they're not fully above board. That tends to also be another hallmark of dark romance. But I would definitely say heroes that need to be redeemed and morally gray are, I would think, two very defining things.
I saw Valerie smiling with, like, that seemed like a good answer to you.
Well, it does, and it refers me to some books that actually fall into that nicely in case I need to go back and get a hit.
Mm-hmm. I actually
thank you.
recently discovered somebody, Jagger Cole and Mafia, and it was interesting. I did not realize he is a man, and they are very spicy, but the stories are good.
I'm sorry, I love that we say he's a male romance author, but it's good.
There are male romance out there. I didn't really know that much. Mind you, I never read Nicholas Sparks or anything, so it didn't he didn't really pop into my head. But the first couple times I came across it, it was, I think, some sports romance writers and things like that, but it was really good.
Excellent. All right. Anything else before we let Melanie get back to doing her thing? Let you all get back to your words.
I was trying to think if there was anything. No, I think it was, my thing too is, I think, the trying to clarify between the different types of all the terms out there. I mean, there's beta readers, there's alpha readers, there's, and you see all these little things listed in people's bios, like, Bookstagram people. It's like, oh, I'm an alpha reader and I'm a whatever. I remember just being very overwhelmed by all of that. It took a long time for me even to separate my services, to try to figure out what I would offer in a beta and what I would do as a developmental editor. So I was like, okay, I hope that this, if anything, helped clarify some of that for people, because it's a lot out there.
It clearly clarified it for me. Diana's asking, oh no, Ashley says, what's your turnaround for a beta analysis?
Usually 2 weeks, no, 14 days, usually 14 to 16 days, depending.
Okay. And Diane, good question. Will you be getting a website?
Yes.
You know what? I think it's next week we're talking to a website developer. So maybe I should connect you with Jessica and just
it's, you know what it is? It's not even that part, it's the words. It is literally the words. It is the worst thing about being an editor. I will go back and I will look at the sentence and be like, no, I don't think that's going to work. And I'll change it. And then you find out, what, the next 2 sentences have to change because of this. And, one of my friends actually got so fed up with me. She goes, why don't you just, I couldn't believe it. She said to me, why don't you just use AI? I was like, no, Just stop what you're saying. Just no. Okay. Like, I don't know what you think you're saying here, but this is not, I'm not selling a product or anything. Like, you're selling to people that write for a living. Okay. And it's one of those things. Oh, I think this was another thing I wanted to sort of talk about is the goal of everything that I do. Of course, it's amazing to be able to say, I have, you know, some of my authors, their books are on bestsellers lists and all that sort of stuff. It makes me feel great. I love it. It's amazing. However, my goal in all of this, whether you work no matter how you work with me, is to have you create a story that is authentic to you. Like, nobody can guarantee a bestseller or anything like that, or that it's going to even, I don't know, but the most important thing I think is to write a story that's authentic to you, and your voice, your style, whatever it is, because that will sell, rather than looking on TikTok and being like, ooh, this seems like it's really hot right now, or this, whatever, but it's not anything that you've ever done, or you're sometimes too, like, I can read something sometimes, even published books, and you can read it and be like, this is something that's being included in here because they're hoping that it's going to get picked up. It's going to somehow resonate on social media and it's going to go viral, and you put too many. I'm not against doing a little bit of that. Like, I can tell you right now, based on maybe the last 10 books I read, certain terms, baby girl right now is really back again. Last year, writing, excuse me, sorry, hopefully, I assume there's no kids around. Writing people's faces was really big last year. Right now, 69 is making a comeback. Like, it's, certain things like that you can just see are happening kind of in a lot of books. The other thing right now that I notice is very popular, a lot of the heroines or just characters in the book are definitely bringing our culture, the reading culture, into the books. Either heroines are authors themselves, or they're big romance readers themselves, and they like talk about tropes. They talk about like the book boyfriends. They like, there's a lot of that kind of our reader culture being sprinkled into books too, into stories lately, I find. So it's kind of those things, but you get a little too much into that. You add a little too much of it into it. And I'm telling you, it's like I said to you before, it's like how dogs smell fear. You know that you're kind of writing a little too much to market and not your authentic voice. And in the end, and I've worked with some very experienced authors, and unfortunately, whatever it is, even though we love the story so much, it didn't do as well as some of their other books.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I try not to do this, is to read reviews, and I would read the reviews and I would feel really crappy and everything. But the reality is, the author says, she goes, you know what? I'm happy with it. That's what is most important at the end of the day. This was the story I wanted to tell. It's told in the way that I wanted it to be done, and they're happy with it. And that's, sometimes all you get out of it. Unfortunately, not every single one is necessarily destined or is able to make it.
Right. I just realized, as you were saying, you try not to read reviews. I read reviews of one author's books. Mine, I can't imagine being an editor and reading reviews of 12 authors' books. It would just be like, how stressful.
I really try not to.
No,
it's a really hard thing to do.
Oh.
And because readers now too, they wield a lot of power. And sometimes it makes me really bonkers when I know that, this story that an author of mine wrote or whatever, like they're amazing authors, but they're not getting as much notice as someone else's story. And I've read that story too. And to me, I think, oh, well, this one is stronger, but it's not selling as well, so it is frustrating, the way sometimes social media has really gotten into everything and how it can really affect the page reads, and everything. But with that said, I think probably the last one of the last things I could say is to find somebody that works and understands you.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think there is a wide range of editors out there for you to choose from, and I think it's really, really important to find an author that understands who you are to be able to find an editor that understands who you are to bring out to enhance your voice and your story, I think is really important.
I think
That's
that's a perfect place to end. And that is exactly why I'm interested in introducing a collection of editors, specifically romance editors, to the romance author community, because we have to find the editors who get us and I kind of like, I don't know, add sparkle to our voice as opposed to, changing it anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is
Colleen.
really my biggest goal is to do that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much. I know this was one of your very first big group meetings like this. You're such a natural.
Are you sure? I was so
100%.
nervous.
100%. It was really, really fun, which is always like top of my list. Did I laugh? Did I smile? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, and informative. I've learned things. I will, I need that same continuum. Where does this fit? Editing is it's big. It's a big thing. And
Well,
as you
your
say,
story is a big thing, and so all your stories are big things, and it requires a lot of effort. I completely empathize with authors about that, how much effort you put into creating your worlds, your characters, everything. I think that's the heart of all of it, all that effort you put in.
art. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for showing up live. Lovely to see everybody and to meet Glenda. I have not met you, but I hope to see you next week. We think it is that we're going to be talking website and then back to editors. So look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks for showing up.
Bye.
Bye.